Yeah, I call this From Snapshot to Photography, and I teach a lot of classes where we talk about all the buttons and the dials and the menu settings and so forth, and people attend a lot of those and you get a lot of those. I'm not going to be covering any of that stuff today. Okay, nothing, I'm going to try to avoid anything technical, because what I've discovered is many times people go out and they spend a lot of money on a camera. Anybody spend a lot of money on a camera? Yeah, everybody here. Spend a lot of money on a camera, and they spend a lot of time trying to read the manual and understand it. And then when they get done, their pictures look exactly like they were before. So we're going to take a look at the difference of how to work with that. I'm actually a former school teacher, and so my last school I was at, the principal was really heavy into the brain. So we're going to talk a little bit about the brain here. We got the left side and the right side. As you know, on the left side of the brain, that's your logical, that's where you kind of analyze things and so forth. And that's what most people do when they go to a class and they learn about all the different dials and stuff like that. They're using the left side of their brain. But the minute you pick up your camera, you're no longer working with just the mechanics of the camera, but you're starting to use the right side of your brain. Now, the right side of your brain is that kind of random creative side. And that's what really makes those beautiful photographs. So that's the aesthetics of photography. So that's going to be my primary emphasis on there. Now, that doesn't mean you can't learn about the stuff. You still need to learn about your camera. You need to know where the buttons are. And so I'm assuming at this point you know where your buttons are, you know where your menus are, and you know all the settings of the camera. So I'm not going to go, if you have any questions on that, I won't have time to cover those sort of things. All those things are in the manual. Had you read it and understood it, you would know all that stuff already. So you should know some basics of exposure, and there's lots of classes on that. You need to know what the aperture does. How does it control light, but also how does it do things creatively? And we will talk a little bit about doing things creatively with the aperture, or time value, and I'll talk a little bit about that creatively, not what it does with that. And of course, ISO, there's nothing creative about that, but that's known as the exposure triangle. That's how you get, you're always going to balance those three out. So you're going to need to kind of know what those are ahead of time in order to understand which settings you want to use. Do you want to use a big aperture, small aperture, time value, and so forth? So hopefully you've already got that. And then there's lighting. Lighting is, quite frankly, your only subject. Is anybody in this room, does anybody here shoot dark? You shoot dark. Okay. Take the lens cap off. Okay, you'll be fine. So lighting is your only subject. So you need to learn about lighting. And there's ambient light. A lot of people start with the ambient light. They just love ambient. They're only an ambient light shooter. That's because they're too cheap to buy a flash. But there's times when you need to use a flash. You need to pop up the flash, or maybe you need an external flash. You need to know when to use external flash. Are you going to take that flash? Are you going to shoot it directly at a person? That's not a good thing to do unless you're outdoors and you're doing a little fill flash, bounce flash, off camera, taking it off and doing it from different directions. So it's always all about light. So that's all your subject is. And then of course, once you start learning about the light, then there's other things you can do. You use modifiers, you can use reflectors, lots of things. So you can be very, very creative. And so I want to start thinking about the right side of the brain, that creative side, and using these things. Of course, you can get into studio lighting. You see the same thing over and over again. I don't know how many studios I've gone to, and every picture in the studio looks exactly the same with using studio lighting. But I like to be a little more creative and use the others, the other type, off camera, out in the field and so forth. Post-processing, we're in a digital age now. Used to be post-processing means put it in the envelope and send it off to the company to get it developed. Okay, that was post-processing. When we went into digital, I just could not believe all the professionals that were just going crazy. That's just too much work. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you just opened up a whole new world. I can control my images. Like I said, I was a school teacher. I did not teach photography. I taught Photoshop. So I wanted to control those, and I couldn't do it with film until I scanned it in. Now I got digital photos, I can work with that. So you need to know your camera software. Now, how many people in this room are not Canon shooters? Okay, we got quite a few. So whatever camera you have, you need to learn what the software that came with the camera. That's very important. With us, digital photo professionals, probably my go-to. I probably use this on 90% of everything, and I'm done with that. So that it's great for making the adjustments, but this software really is for global adjustments. So I will adjust it. Like if I took the shot and I thought the shot thought it was just the right lighting in that, and then later on I changed my mind, I can lighten it, I can darken it, I can change the colors. I might want to take the saturation down or maybe take it up for something else. So I can make a lot of changes to that. That's mostly because I shoot in RAW. And I do everything in RAW. The only time I shoot in JPEGs is when somebody borrowed my camera and changed it on me. Okay. And that's happened a few times. But I shoot in RAW, and then I always use Digital Photo Professional for those Canon users. I never use Adobe Camera Raw for a number of reasons. It's backwards engineered. I never use that for that. I do use Adobe all the time, but not for the RAW conversion. I always use this program. So there are other photo editing programs, and again, this is a huge learning curve. We could spend probably 2-3 weeks just talking about Adobe by itself. But Adobe is probably, you know, the main player on the street there, but there are other programs out there as well. So you need to, if you want to have great images, you have to kind of have a little background in working with this. So you can go with very expensive software all the way down to free software. But learning how to make some adjustments and controlling your images is very important. Now that's left brain stuff. Okay, and I'm going to try to avoid the left brain stuff, the technical stuff, as much as possible here. I'm going to be covering two things that will really change your photography. One is a little bit left-right brain is lenses, and we're going to talk about a little bit about which ones to use, so we'll talk some basic stuff about that, it's a little left brain stuff, and then how they affect your photography. And I'm going to be talking during the entire presentation about the different lenses I use when you see things here. So lenses are very important, and to go hand in hand with that, once you get the right lens, you're still going to get the same picture. We're going to go right brain, we're going to look at composition. This is very important. This is simply how you arrange the elements in your picture. And a lot of people have no understanding. I just did a high-end, very expensive workshop, and people learned about flashes. And I looked at their flash pictures, and they did a wonderful job on the lighting, but their compositions were terrible. And they just didn't have an understanding. So it looked just like a snapshot with great lighting. So what you want to do is arrange those elements so the picture tells the story you want people to see. So that's what we're going to be doing, is telling some stories. So let's take a look real quick at lenses. And if you're a Canon shooter, you're in luck. Canon has more lenses to choose from than any other company. So you've got a wide variety to choose from. You can do a lot of creative things. If you're not sure by the end of this presentation which lens you want, I would suggest you buy one of each. Typically what you're going to do is you're going to get a basic lens, a kit lens that comes with it. Usually the 18-55 is the most common of the lenses. 18-135 is another kit lens. It's a little bit more money, but a lot of people like that one as well. I really like this. Is one of my favorite walk-around lenses for a crop sensor. And we'll talk about sensors in just a second here. But they're great because they're going to give you that realistic look there. They do an excellent job in just basic shooting, the walk around sort of stuff, you know, friends and family. They have a little bit of a wide angle, so it looks a little bit wider than what your eye normally sees. And you got a little telephoto, so you can get a little bit closer with the lens than you're actually seeing when you're standing there. So they're pretty good. Now typically what we've had in the past is a 35mm film. The standard was 50 millimeters. And the reason for that is our eyes see at approximately 50 millimeters. You really can't tell between 40 and 60 around there. You can't tell a difference. But we see around 50 millimeters. So kind of that's our starting point, is 50 millimeters. Everything looks realistic. There are people who shoot with nothing but a 50 millimeter. They want everything to look real. However, I'm not one of those people. I like my photography to look different. So I usually stay away from the 50 millimeters in many cases. But 50 millimeters is going to give you that very natural, that normal perspective that you're used to seeing. So if you want it to look natural, especially if you're doing a wedding, a group shot like that, 50 millimeters is a great way to go. Things that are far away, look far away. Things that are close up, look close up. Then you have wide angles. Wide angles are what we use when we're in a tight situation. We want to get more information in than what our eye normally sees. You have, with these lenses, you have that wide angle as well. And usually we talk about wide angle, we're dropping down to about 35 millimeters or lower. So that, when I say wide angle, that's what I'm talking about. 35 millimeters all the way down, we go down to 14 millimeters. Actually, we have a 10 to 22, I'll talk about it a little later too. And then telephoto lenses, typically we're starting about 85 millimeters, and 85 to about 300 is what we consider telephoto. After that, we get to what's called super telephoto. That's 300 millimeters or longer.
So 85 to what?
85 to 300 is telephoto, and 300 on is super telephoto. Okay, now I got to go back through that there. My kitty cat. Okay. Now, a full frame sensor, if you have a camera with full, now I'm getting kind of technical here, but if you have a camera with a full frame sensor, you spend a lot of money on a camera, and they're wonderful to work with. It's the same size as film. So the lenses look pretty natural to what you did in film. However, most people getting into digital photography for the first time really don't want to spend all that money on it because it's a big learning curve. I'm not sure if I'm going to like this and that. So they tend to go for something that's a little smaller, an APS-C cropped sensor. And this is a 1.6, and I'll talk about the sorry to get technical here, but there'll be a 1.6 crop on that. I'll show you what that crop actually does in just a second. Now, the reason people go to that's still a huge sensor. I mean, if you have a point and shoot, typically this is a large sensor for a point and shoot, a 1 divided by 1.7. Most of them are usually 1 divided by 2.3. So there's quite a bit of difference in the sizes of those. And it will make a big difference in something we'll talk about later called bokeh. Being able to get that soft, creamy background. And also when you're going into low light situations, the actual little pixels themselves are much bigger, so they let in a lot more light and there's less noise. So it makes for a much nicer picture as well. So lens conversion, when we take a look at this, most of you probably have, does anybody here have a full frame sensor camera? We got a few of them here. Okay, those with the smaller sensors, this is a full frame, just taken with a full frame sensor at 14 millimeters. If you take that same lens and you put it on one of those crop sensors, what you're going to do is you're going to crop that down to a smaller size. So this is the area you're going to get. It's not actually zooming in. You feel like you're zooming in on it, but what you're doing is you're changing the angle of view. So it actually acts more like a 22 millimeter on that full frame when you put that crop sensor on there. So you're going to lose some of the wide angle if you have a crop sensor. There's not a whole lot wrong with that, but just remember you got that 1.6, so you just take and multiply that by times 1.6 you get. So that 14 millimeter then now acts like a 22, which means that's a disadvantage at the wide angle. The 50 millimeter acts like an 80, so it's the same. But when you get a telephoto, if you got 300 millimeter, it acts like a 480. Now, if you've ever bought a 300 millimeter, you know they're expensive. Imagine what a 500 millimeter would cost. Okay, throw it on a crop sensor. You just took care of that problem. So it's a huge advantage if you'd like to do wildlife photography, nature photography, and so forth, or sports. I usually use a crop sensor while I'm doing that. So let's talk about, first of all, a wide angle. And wide angle lenses used to scare me. I was telephoto, I was macro. I loved them. Don't give me a wide angle. I don't have a clue what to do with it because everything I did with wide angle looked terrible. So let's take a look at. So this is a wide angle lens. This is a 10 to 22 that I use. So typically when we get a wide angle, what we're thinking to do is getting large landscapes or we're in tight, cramped areas. That's when we want to use a wide angle. But the wide angle itself can produce some incredibly powerful pictures if you know some of the aspects behind it and what it does. So we're going to take a look at some powerful images that we can create with wide angle as well. I love this shot. It's one of my favorite shots. I have no idea who took it. It's not mine, but I'll never take it out of the presentation. I love it. It just looks so powerful to me. Plus, it's kind of when I grew up. So wide angle can make a powerful shot. Now we have, for those of you who have the crop sensors, a 10 to 22. This will not fit on the full frame sensors. Well, it'll kind of, and it'll pop out your viewfinder and it'll break your camera. So I don't suggest you use it. But a 10 to 22 is designed for the smaller ones. Now it's an EFS lens. We have EF lenses and EFS lenses. If it has an S, it only is for a crop sensor. This imaging circle coming out the back will only fit that smaller one. So if you were to be able to put it on a full frame, you'd get vignetting on the edges. You get dark corners, so it wouldn't work. But the advantage of it is it uses smaller glass, and we can make a better lens for less money. This actually has the quality of an L lens. Even though it's not technically an L lens, it has the same quality as an L lens. So 10 to 22, if you've done the math yet, that's the same as a 16-35 on a full frame sensor. If you do have a full frame, then we do have some wide angles. 70-40, this is an f4 straight through. This is an L lens, and this is the 16-35. So that's the widest zoom lens you can get on a full frame. Remember, the 10-22 with the conversion is a 16-35. So we have a match up there, and we have a lot of EFS lenses that match up with another full frame type of lens. So you have an option no matter what kind of camera you have. Now here is why I don't like wide angle, or didn't like wide angle. All my pictures look like this. Okay, everything was just really far away. The key to a wide angle then is, if you're going to shoot something like that, is to take and put something into the foreground. So here's your first key with wide angles. Put something in the foreground. It makes things a whole lot more powerful. I could have stepped around the sign here and shot up at the buildings, but putting something in the foreground with a wide angle makes things a lot more interesting, a lot more powerful. So always look for something to put in the foreground. You're going to see a whole lot of pictures where I do that. Now, a wide angle does cause distortion. There is distortion. Whatever's closest to you looks bigger than it should be on this, and so it will give that a lot of emphasis. So if you have something you really want to emphasize, put it really close to the lens. Get it up close. It also has a tendency to have a great depth of field, so your background stays in focus, so you can capture all the, like I wanted to see the coffee back there. But you'll be able to have all that detail and keep that detail as well. So here's, this is a dramatic picture. To me, it's powerful. There's something about it. I don't know what it is. And the reason you don't know what it is because the lens sees it different than your eye does. It's actually distorting the front, and it looks much bigger in the front than in the back, when in reality, it wasn't quite like that.
How wide is that angle?
I don't know how wide this is. Not all these pictures are mine. Probably 60% are. So, but I'm not sure. I think this one was probably a 16-35, probably taken at about 16 millimeters. And I'm just guessing here because I've done enough of this. So that's the key, is to use that wide angle for your perspective there. And just taking benches, getting up close. Notice you get right down on top of the bench here, doing the wide angle. Notice the depth of field is just beautiful all the way across here. And I've actually done this in Central Park with some of them out there. So if you have a wide angle, it's great to go ahead and take and shoot, get really close to something and watch how your images just pop out at you. You need to shoot vertical too. I don't know how many people I go and shoot with and they have the camera like this the whole time. Okay, you need to turn the camera vertically. When do you shoot horizontal and when do you shoot vertical? Well, Rick Salmon's one of our Explorers Light. He says the answer is yes. Okay, you do both. You never know which one you're going to like. But typically there's a rule of thumb that I follow. If my subject is vertical, I shoot vertical. If it's horizontal, I shoot horizontal. So in this case, we got long, very strong vertical lines. So I'm going to turn my camera vertical and shoot vertical. And then I'm going to take and move it horizontal when I have horizontal lines. Typically when you're shooting people, they're vertical. But here's a horizontal picture. I would think to shoot horizontally, but it's shot vertically. Why did I shoot it vertically? Because it's a wide angle shot, and I want to capture something in the foreground. Capturing the rocks gives it a lot more drama. I'm still going to show that I'm at the ocean. So you want to be able to do that. Vertical, again, vertical here, so I'm going to shoot vertical. This is out in Wyoming. Now what's nice too is the wide angle, with your background being in focus on that, it gives you the sense of place. So I will often use this for portraits if I want to have a sense of place. So now I know I'm not just shooting cheerleaders and Yellow Kings here, but I know it's a game because of all the people in the background there. So wide angle gives you that sense of place. It makes it very easy to work with. It's very effective for portraits. Typically, I would not suggest a wide angle for a portrait. But in this particular case, yes, this is an environmental portrait. We want to see this Russian gal. I can tell because that's Russian down there. Russian gal and all the stuffed animals in the background. That's important to get that. With a wide angle, I can get up close to her, get her picture, and still have lots of room on the outside to capture all that information. So that's where wide angles are very, very helpful. Here again, I could use a telephoto, capture these two as a special moment here, but with the wide angles, actually able to capture the ship in the background and still get lots of detail with a wide angle. Very difficult to do with a longer telephoto. But you got to watch your viewfinder. Okay, look at it very carefully. It's because the wide angle does capture all that information. Sometimes you capture things that you don't really want in the picture. So there's the challenge that I usually had with wide angle. That's why I had a problem, is I wasn't really watching that. I mean, I could Photoshop that out, but it's, it's kind of like a garbage can in there. You can Photoshop the garbage can out, or you could go and move the garbage can and then take the picture, or just move a little bit. Okay, so watch in your viewfinder and see what you have there. So your job with a wide angle is, since it does include so much information, is to try to minimize the amount of information that you're going to be shooting. So try to simplify your picture. Again, with a wide angle, lots of depth of field. So here we get the tiles in here are in focus, and the tree way in the back, they're still in focus. Very easy to do when you're using a wide angle lens. So if I want to get everything sharp, I tend to lean towards the wide angle so I can get everything sharp. It's easy, it's nice to do. For instance, this one here this is the 10-22 zoom. Everything is in focus here and in focus there. Somebody want to guess at what the f-stop is on this? F8? F16? Yeah, that sounds good. That's what I would guess too. Yeah, this is f4. That's f4 to 10-22. I told you, this is a phenomenal lens. Got everything in focus. In fact, it's really hard to throw stuff out of focus with this. If you want to throw something out of focus like this, the way to get things out of focus, there's actually 3 things you do. You open up the aperture, but there's 2 other things that are important to it. One is the size of the sensor. That's why some people really like that full frame sensor, because it gets a shallower depth of field. And the other is how close you get to your subject. So that's why macros have such a shallow depth of field, because you're so close to your subjects. So you really, with a wide angle, you really need to get close to your subject in order to get that background out of focus. Makes it very difficult. Also, you can hand hold a wide angle in low light situations much easier. Does anybody know the rule for hand holding? What shutter speed should you be using?
Less than 30.
6. I hear that. Yeah, that's the old film days. Yeah. Actually, there's a formula in the back.
Usually, for the subject, you were shooting with 400 to be 400%.
Well, 400th. Yeah, it's 1 divided by your focal length. Exactly. Good. 1 divided by your focal length. So if you're shooting a 300 millimeter, it'd be 1/300th of a second. Now we'll talk about image stabilization later, how that affects it. But at 15 millimeters, I can shoot this at 1/15th of a second and hand hold it in the dark. So a lot of times when I want to shoot in a low light situation and it's a slow shutter speed, 1/8 of a second, still it's nice and sharp. This one here, we want to have a long shutter speed to build up the ambient light in the background before the flash goes off. So we would use a wide angle. And then of course, this is great for exploiting patterns. And I love to shoot patterns for a variety of reasons. And later on, I'll talk about patterns and how they work. Typically, I would wait for the bird to leave. Later on, I'll explain to you why the bird is still in the scene. And then, of course, if you're in a tight situation, nothing's going to beat a wide angle. So, if you're looking for something interesting and you can't seem to find it, chances are you have a 50 millimeter. Everything looks the same. But go to a wide angle. And then don't forget, everybody has their camera up like this. It's always horizontal. Click, click, click. Okay, don't forget, you should also take and look up. Otherwise, we have no documentations of UFOs. And you should look down. I'll talk a little more about this picture later. This is my father. Okay, I'll explain that later. And then something like this, because you can get the background, getting fairly close, so we throw the background out of focus. But some people take a picture of the steeples, some people take a picture of the flower. With a wide angle, allows you to get both of them together. And it gets a very impressive picture. So, close-ups with wide angles will really let you get a lot closer than other types of lenses do. Typically, you can get about 1 foot away with a wide angle, and so you get very close to this. This is actually only a few feet apart, but it looks like, because it stretches it out, looks like it's a lot further. But very interesting, because you get very, very close to that. Notice how that's exaggerated. This is the same size flowers, that one there, and it's only a couple feet away. With our eyes at 50 millimeters, we saw them pretty much the same size, but look what that does. It's very dramatic, the way the flowers in the front come out. We've seen this several times already, but you notice how dramatic that is? That looks huge. I mean, what is that? That's about 1/3 of the size of the hood, but you and I know that it wasn't 1/3 of the size of the hood. but it's just being exaggerated by that. So it makes it very, very dramatic. So wide angle, just remember your standard zoom, whatever zoom you have. Basically, you have a wide angle. The 1785, the 17 is actually on the crop sensors is 28, so it's a fairly wide angle lens there. Wide angles for a 7D, 20D, and so forth, there's lots to choose from. Any of these EF lenses can be put on a crop sensor or full frame. They can fit on any of them as well. 1740 f 4.0 all the way through the entire zoom range. Very, very sharp, so if you like f4, that's great. If you want something a little faster, you can get twice the speed with the 1635's f2.8. Just a word of warning here, when you go from f4 to f2.8, you've doubled the amount of light that's coming in through the lens. You've also doubled the amount that's going to be removed from your bank account. Okay. It's typically the rule of thumb there. We also have some fixed ones as well. So we can actually go down to 14, 20, 24, and so forth. So we have a lot of fixed focal lengths. So it means they're not going to zoom at all. So why would you want something that doesn't zoom? Zooms are so much easier. They're so much more flexible. You know, I like to use the zooms a lot. Well, typically you can get a faster aperture. So far, all we've seen is f2.8. And for zoom lenses, f2.8 is about your limit. But if you want something a little faster, you want something better for low light, you want even more open aperture for that softer bokeh, you pretty much are going to have to go through that. They tend to focus closer. You can get closer focusing with them. They frequently superior in the linear distortion. That means when you're looking at the lines and that, they're not bending. So they tend to be a lot straighter because there's not as many elements for the zooming. On full frame sensors, this is very, very compelling. That's where I fell in love. I had a 5D, 14 millimeter fixed focal length. That's when I fell in love with a full frame, with wide angle lenses on that. So that's the wide angle. Let's go all the way to the other end to telephoto, because now we're going to change all the rules and how pictures are going to look. Now with telephoto lenses, and this was my favorite, of course, you've got a lot to choose from here. But I use telephotos, use a lot of telephotos when I do portraits. I like to go beyond 50 millimeters because they have a tendency to compress the face a little, compress the nose, and it's a little more attractive. Nobody likes the size of their nose. So by compressing that, it looks a little bit better. It's great for shy subjects, subjects that don't like you to get too close to them. Or subjects, I shot this in Kalispell, subjects you don't want to get close. That mountain lion actually ran right through between me and another person here. But there's times you don't want to get too close. Typically, the rule of thumb is you pick your telephoto lens based on where you are on the food chain. Okay? The lower you are, the longer you want it. So that's how I pick it. But what's nice is the way it isolates. Remember, we had trouble isolating with the wide angle. With this, it's very hard to get a great depth of field. It's very, very shallow, and so the background really gets blown out, and you can isolate your subject very, very nicely. So it's just the opposite of what you do with a wide angle. So now you're getting a very pleasing background with that. So it makes a big difference. Here I just didn't want to get too close. Not only was that 1B there, but these were put up, this is actually out in a tulip field, and they put these trees up to attract the bees so people aren't getting stung around the flowers. So, but I got some great shots there. But you do have to be careful because of the lack of depth of field and focusing. You got to be careful what you're focusing, because if you don't, you might end up focusing on the wrong thing and getting the wrong item that you want. So here, what is my subject here? You would think it was there, but that wasn't supposed to be my subject. So you have to be very careful when telling your story that your subject is the sharpest thing, is in focus. Focusing is important with this, and just kind of a key to focusing. In order to focus, you need to have some detail. So in a shot like this, we're shooting stuff fast, there's lots of detail in here. If you don't have detail, your camera's going to have trouble focusing. It needs something to grab onto. And that's why we have our image stabilization built into our lens, because it kind of stops things, has something to grab onto, and focuses faster. If you put it in the camera, then things are going crazy in there and it's not stabilized. It takes longer to focus. So that's why we always put our image stabilization into the lenses. I'll talk a little more about that later. Here's that rule we were talking about here. This is a shot taken with a 300 millimeter at 1/60th of a second. You see how soft it is from the motion. Not of the person moving, they're just standing there still. But it's from the photographer, probably a Seattle photographer after their 4th latte. It also has, I talked about that compression, but what you're looking at here is a road about 1/4 of a mile long. Yet this looks very, very compressed. In fact, the Department of Transportation in Washington asked if they could use this picture because I got when I shot this. But this S-curve here, nice S-curve that I have in there, and it compressed it quite a bit. I just loved it. This is taken with a 500 millimeter lens. They have a little scenic outlook there, so I just took this with 500 millimeter, which of course nobody else will get. They are shooting horses up there. And so it compresses. This is a very long building, and so you're taking a lot of information and compressing it together. It's a very interesting feeling that you can get. I used to, when Ted Kennedy was alive, I used to love State of the Union because they'd use this like 1200 millimeter or whatever to shoot the State of the Union, and you'd see whoever the president was, because there was a lot of them when he was alive. The president's head would be here, and then Ted Kennedy's head would be like this, because it would pull that in and it'd actually look bigger. So that actually creates that sort of effect. So this is the sort of effect that you would get with a long telephoto. So you can create some very interesting things with long telephoto lenses, things that you don't normally see with the human eye, and that's what makes your photographs interesting. They don't look like the snapshots from your iPhone. Okay? Again, we talked about isolating the subjects. It makes it very easy to isolate the subject with that. It makes it kind of hard to get more details in there. So if you want to isolate a subject easily, a telephoto is a great lens to go to. So to simplify, we talked about simplifying. You don't need to really worry about it with a telephone. It's really easy to simplify with that. But when you're shooting, and we're going to talk a little bit more of this in composition, when you're shooting, make sure your subject really is off center. So many people put it direct center. So we want to avoid that. Again, off center. Now some of the uses for telephones are obvious. This shot I took with a 500 millimeter at a Seahawks game. I could have used a wide angle on this. However, security would have hauled me off of the field because I'd have to be right on top of the player there. So you need the long telephoto there. Very seldom will you use a wide angle. Just at the end of the game, usually we have some wide angles out there. But shooting sports, I wasn't about to go into the water because I wasn't dressed for it. So using a long telephoto for something like this, or shooting a rodeo, and he pulled his leg out just in time. These are so adorable, but I wouldn't want to get too close to one. They weigh a whole lot. And of course, yeah, it's a nice kitty. Actually, he's very playful. I'm not going to be a play toy though. So I use long telephoto, and this one here's a mountain lion, jumping through. So, and that one actually was kind of close. That's about 100 feet away. Those all I'm using. That one I'm actually using a 7200 millimeter lens on that. So, some of the things though are less obvious. For instance, doing a landscape, everybody goes to the wide angle for landscape. But this landscape is very interesting. This is, these trees here are probably about half a mile away from the road where this is taken. Then you got the hills and the mountains out there. You can barely see the mountains, are way back there. So using long telephoto takes and then compresses everything, brings the mountains right up to it. So if I want to do a big panoramic, I could use a wide angle and get this big panoramic, and then I can crop it. But what I would get is these trees in the foreground, and I could hardly see the mountains in the background. But if I took a long telephoto and took a series of shots and stitched them together, I'd get the same panoramic, but now I'd have the mountains just on top of you. And people say, I was there, how in the world did you get that? In other words, you're going from that snapshot mentality to taking photographs. You got to start thinking about what you're doing. That's a little bit of left brain stuff, but once you get it, the right brain starts to kick in and get some beautiful stuff. Or isolating your subjects. This is maybe a mile away, and using a long telephoto, you can get some good stuff. Choosing the right telephoto, of course, I usually suggest if you're thinking of telephoto, start with the 800 millimeter, because after that, you'll never have sticker shock again. But you really don't have to have the biggest one. Actually, some of our most popular telephotos we have, 75-300. It's not stabilized, so typically I suggest you use a tripod with that. But it's real popular because it's very lightweight and it's very inexpensive. However, the more popular one is the 7300 because now we're starting to use the image stabilization. And image stabilization is important more at the long end than it is at wide angle. because of that rule, for hand holding, you need it more at the long end. So image stabilizing, so this is a good place to start. And some people who have a lot of money and going to Africa, I will suggest this over our L series lens. We do have an L series version of that because it's lighter weight and they're limited to 28 pounds. They can't take on the planes when they go to Africa. So I would suggest that over this. However, if you're not going to Africa, then I suggest this over the other one. What's the difference between the two? It's the L. The L stands for L series, which I believe stands for lots of money, or low bank account, something like that. This does have this one I don't believe has the fluorite. This is one the 7200s do. So this is a professional optic, but it's breathtaking. It's become one of my favorite lenses. And I brought the 7200 this time instead of that. We got the 100 to 400 L series. This is probably the favorite lens of people who do nature photography, bird photography, and so forth, because it's lightweight. You got 400 millimeters. It is a push-pull, so there's some limit. Yeah, it sucks in the air and the dust. It was great for film because if you got dust on your film, you just go to the next frame, right? Now you got to turn off your camera, turn it back on, and get rid of the dust. So I do that a lot. They have image stabilization. It's very important to have image stabilization at the long end. So now you can change that rule that we talked about. So it depends on how many levels of image stabilization. Some of the early ones had 2. Most of them today have 4 stops of stabilization that we come out with. So this is a typical example here of a blurry picture, handheld. This is taken with a 100-400 at 300 millimeters, so it should be 1/300th of a second, but it's at 60 millimeters. Now this has 3 stops of stabilization. So 300 millimeters, 1 stop means I can shoot at 1/150th of a second. 2 stops means I could do it 1/75th. 3 stops, 60th is no problem at all. I can do that. So if I was to turn the image stabilization on, I can get a nice sharp picture. So image stabilization, is it worth spending the extra money for stabilization? Only if you want to get the shot. And most people want to get the shot. So I usually strongly recommend it. Now some of the lower end cameras lenses are great for taking pictures outdoors. When there's lots of light, it works very, very well. So if I'm shooting outdoors and I've got lots of light, they're great lenses. So I really don't need a really fast lens. However, typically the aperture settings on this are at the long end are 5.6, which is the smallest aperture you can get and still get auto-focusing on these. So if you take it indoors and shoot, you might find it's a little more difficult to get a good shutter speed and to get the shutter speed up with that. So if you're going to be shooting indoors and you don't have a lot of light to work with, the answer, typically either use a flash, and you need to learn how to use a flash, whether you use bounce flash or direct flash and that, or change your ISO settings. That used to be a no-no. Stay away from the ISO. Now it really doesn't matter, especially if you shoot in RAW and use our RAW converter for that. The noise reduction in the camera is good. The noise reduction in the software is much better. And so I typically would do my noise reduction in the software. I don't use Adobe Camera Raw because it typically adds noise to my pictures, and I don't want that. So if I'm shooting high ISO, I typically will use a Digital Photo Professional. If you're using Nikon or Sony or some other, make sure you use their software because it's not backwards engineered. It's the best way to go. Quick question?
What about Lightroom?
That's Adobe Camera Raw. So they're all using the same thing, yeah. I just got the latest version of Adobe Lightroom hoping it would be better, and I pull up 2 of them side by side. No, not yet. But I love Lightroom. I love using Lightroom. So you can also get a faster telephoto. F4, you can go down to F2.8. Well, it depends on how big your bank account is. You can go down to F2, F1.8. I mean, just remember the lower that number is, the lower your bank account is. So. This is one of my favorite lenses. This is a wonderful 1.2, 85 millimeters. This is a wonderful portrait lens, especially if you put it on a crop sensor. You're going to get nice bokeh, lots of light coming in, low light situation. I absolutely love this lens. But you can see here, it's a nice sharp picture, but look at how much that's blown out in the background. I mean, we've completely lost, you can't tell those are actually holes back there, but again, the low light. And we're capturing this. We're able to shoot at a fast enough shutter speed because the aperture is so big, and then the girls in the back are just dropping off with that nice bokeh. So you get your subjects in the front and then a little bit less in the back. This is one of our sharpest lenses out there, 135 mm f2.0, one of the favorites for wedding photographers. So you can see again, 2.0, you got the long telephoto, you got the nice bokeh in the background, big aperture, wonderful lens. And this here is traditional portraits. Typically, you're going to shoot a portrait at about 85 millimeters to 135. That's typically what we use for portraits. We don't use the 50 millimeter. This is a 7200 at 100 millimeters. This one here, another great way of shooting portraits. Use a long telephoto. This is done with a 500 millimeter. So is this one. This was kind of a surprise because this is my first Seahawks game. And I shot this and they won the last 2 seconds. Everybody ran in with their, I heard this big crash. I'm looking at all these big expensive cameras and lenses all over the ground and everybody's with a wide angle and I didn't have a wide angle with me. So I says, oh, there's a cheerleader, she's taking a picture. I took a picture and she's had such good taste in cameras too.
Yeah.
So, but typically with a long telephoto, you're basically looking at people who like to shoot things far away. You're shooting shy subjects like birds, they're going to fly away. But also subjects like this, your street photography. Typically, you look a little strange out there, but you can shoot, you can shoot this a block away, and people don't know you're taking their picture. So it's kind of fun to get those things. Shooting indoors, long telephoto, if they let you in there. Now, if you need a little more reach, we've got some extenders. This is, it says affordable way to get more telephoto out of your lenses. It is affordable, but that's kind of a relative term. Both of these are $500 each. So 1.4 and a 2X. So you got two to choose from. They're the exact same price, both of them. So let's talk a little bit about them. First of all, you can attach it to your camera, just like you do the lens. Then you attach your lens to the teleconverter. So that's all it is. It just goes in between your camera and the lens. The difference between the two is the 1.4 loses a stop of light. This is important when you want autofocus. And the 2X loses 2 stops of light. What they do for your telephoto is that 135 millimeter we were looking at before, that f2, that's now 189 millimeters with this one, 270 with that. You go up to 300 millimeters, you go 420 or 600 millimeters. So it's a long reach. But you still have to have f5.6 in order to use the autofocus. You still manually focus. There's only a few exceptions that'll go up to f8. So, there's just a few pictures taken with this. Here's 420, that's a 300 with a 1.4 on it. This one here is a 600. It's 300 millimeters with a f4 with a 2X. That now makes it f8. Most cameras can't focus, so you're going to have to manually focus. Great way to do that. It's really hard to look through your viewfinder and focus that because we don't have the split screens and the diamonds in that. Go to live view, click it in there, hit the zoom button twice. It'll go into 10 times zoom, fine tune it, hit it again, pops you out, and then take the picture. You'll get excellent focus that way. So that's a little trick I learned when they first got live view in the very first camera, started playing with that and getting the autofocus. 1200 millimeters. Do they still have a 1200 millimeter for sale here? No, you sold it? Okay. We don't make them anymore. We made 12 of them. 600 millimeter with a 2X, got 1200 millimeter. So you can really reach way out there.
I think Sigma has a 1600.
I don't know what that is. She says a Sigma has a 1600. Canon's fixed focal length L series here, 135 millimeter, is kind of the shortest one that you can use here, fixed focal lengths. So this only is going to fit on certain lenses. Most of them are going to be white. So it's kind of a clue there. It's going to be a white lens. So if you have a black lens, chances are you're not going to get it. But it's anything longer than that as well will fit on. And then for your zoom lenses, what you have is a 7200s, all of them. Your f4, your f2.8s, your stabilized or non-stabilized, it doesn't really matter. And then the 100 to 400. Now notice this is 4.5 to 5.6. So the moment you put one on there, you've lost autofocus. So most of the time, you're going to be manual focusing, but it will work. And the reason for that is those extenders actually go inside the lens, and so they have to have room on the inside for those to go inside. So if you get that, the lesser expensive, the black 70 to 300, it's not going to work. It has to be the white ones. And we have a lot of white ones to choose from. There's a large range available for you. We have a variety. We have entry-level lenses, we have mid-range lenses, and then we have what's called the L series lenses. These really are the professional. These are the top of the line. So if you want your sharpest picture and you're ready for that, then you want to step up to that. And most people really can't see the difference in those lenses originally, and as you get better and better, you start to notice a difference to the point where you get good enough, they're just breathtaking what they can do. So we got a couple of dozen of those to choose from. And typically people say, oh yeah, the L lenses, those are the white lenses. Not necessarily. The white lenses are L lenses. However, the red ring around it designates the L. So we do have a lot of white lenses to choose from, but we also have black lenses that have the red ring around it. What's the difference between the white and the black? The difference is there's one element there called a fluorite. It's a fluorite crystal. And years ago we discovered when we did the Olympics, we put these things out in the sun and let them sit there for hours and have to remotely shoot them. And they would throw it slightly out of focus. So the white reflects the light. So that's why we have the light. Now we have competitors that have come out with white lenses because, for marketing probably, but they don't use the fluoride element. Fluoride element makes a huge difference in the sharpness with long telephotos. So we've got a lot to choose from there. And I shoot with all of them. It depends on what I'm shooting, but if I'm doing something professionally, it's going to be with an L lens. So some factors to consider when you're thinking about getting a lens. One, what kind of subject do you like to shoot? If you're shooting wildlife, you want the telephoto. Maybe you want the wide angle because you're shooting indoors and tight areas and stuff all the time. So what kind of subject do you want? The focal length that you want, and the camera magnification. So if you're shooting a crop sensor and you want to get wide angle, you might want to look at that 10 to 22. However, if you really want a lot of reach, you really want that crop sensor, and so that long lens will actually have more length to it than what you had before. Zoom lens or fixed focal length. Fixed focal length, they tend to be sharper. You can have a wider aperture and so forth, but maybe a zoom, you want the flexibility of a zoom lens. Lighting. Typically we're going to be shooting. You want a wider aperture. If you're shooting in shade all the time, you're shooting indoors, you're shooting concerts and so forth. So you'd want to have a faster one there as well. So what kind of lighting are you shooting? Maximum aperture then would depend on your kind of lighting that you have there, or maybe you have plenty of light but you want that nice bokeh for weddings. So you go in that direction. Image stabilization, do you need it or don't you need it? Typically the longer the lens is, the more you need image stabilization, especially if you're not going to be able to put it on a tripod. Wedding photographers, how often do you put it on tripod? When you do the group pictures, and that's about it. Everything else is on the fly. You're moving. And of course, the size and weight and handling, I mentioned that before, going to Africa. Although I much prefer to have an L lens so I can get my best picture, I probably would take a lesser expensive one because it's lighter weight and I can pack it. I actually met a woman who made all of her clothes out of parachute silk so she could bring her white lenses and fit those in there. And of course, cost. That's not important, is it? So what can you afford? Then we do have some special purpose. Just want to mention these real quickly. We have macro lenses. If you really like to get close up and get something like this, you need a macro lens. All of your lenses have a macro setting pretty much. That macro is 1/4 of life. Macro lenses are a 1-to-1 relationship. So if you put in the macro setting, turn off the autofocus, move the camera in until it's in focus, you'll get a true 1-to-1. So if you take a picture of a grain of rice there, it'll actually hit the sensor at the exact same size. So that's a true 1-to-1. So macros also are a lot better for edge-to-edge sharpness and so forth. So for generally speaking, I use that. But also, like this is a 60 millimeter macro being used for portrait. 60 millimeter EFS only goes on crop sensor, so merely it's a 96. Remember, portraits are between 85 and 135. This is a great portrait lens. Again, a portrait done with a 100 millimeter macro. Turn the autofocus back on, it becomes a standard lens again. So you're ready to go. Again, 100 millimeter. Rudy, is Rudy here? Okay, Rudy said he might show up. So we have a number to choose from. We got a 50 millimeter, 60 EFS, which is for the crop sensors only. The 100 millimeter, that's the old one. We got a new one I absolutely love, and if you have a 7D, that's a great way to go. 180 millimeters, and basically the difference is how far you can be from your subjects. So if you're shooting shy subjects like butterflies and bees, you want the longer one. But if you're shooting things like ladybugs, they'll climb right up on the lens. They could care less. They're not very shy. And then we have this. This is a little different, MPE 65 millimeter. This one does do one-to-one relationship, but it goes a lot further. Actually, it'll go up to 5 times life. Depth of field on this, by the way, is, I can't quite get it that close. There's no depth of field. I've literally taken with this and opened up the aperture and got the coin in focus, the lettering in focus, and the coin itself is out of focus. That's how shallow the depth of field is on it. So this is probably shot at f16, even though the background is out of focus. And that's 4x, 3x, 2x, 1x. Like I said, I used to be a school teacher, so I go down to the science room and we take pictures of bugs and stuff. We had a ball with this thing. So it's very difficult to work with, but once you get it, I mean, there's nothing quite like it. And then, of course, you have fisheye, which I've been told that, you know, you don't use a fisheye in wedding photography, use it maybe once or twice. I use mine all the time, take it everywhere I go. This one deliberately distorts the picture. It's going to look like, well, it's a fisheye. It's going to look like you're looking like a fish. I'm not standing so high I see the curvature of the earth. That's the fisheye that's curving the earth. It deliberately will distort it. And then we have tilt-shift lenses, which kind of is an answer to the bellows and stuff in the film days, which we use. And tilt-shift, there's 3 of them there. We actually have 5 of them now. Tilt and shift, basically, what happens is when you shoot something like this building and you're looking up at it, you got the perspective, and the building's leaning up in that direction. So you're looking at straight lines here, and on the right side, did I miss something? On the right side, it's leaning to your left. The left side is leaning to your right, so it's going up like that. And if you're doing architecture and stuff, you want to really straighten that out. You can do that in Photoshop, but it's destructive to the file. So you want to get it right the first time. So by shifting the lens, you can shift it up and down or back and forth. By shifting the lens, then you can straighten it out like this. So now it's nice and straight, and then you don't have to do it in Photoshop. So it's a great way to do it. But we also have the capability to tilt it. And so you're shifting up and down, or you can tilt it like this. Tilting it throws off the focusing plane. It also messes up the metering, but it throws off the focusing plane. So straight on, this is what you would get. Typically, this is a wide open aperture. This is in focus. And then as you get further away, you get the bokeh, you get the out of focus area. It's nice and smooth and even. That's what you expect to get with most lenses. But if you just take and tilt this, you can throw the focusing plane off. And with the same aperture setting, instead of getting that, you're getting this. So everything's focused. It's great for shooting fields. Now, there is some out of focus, a little out of focus here, you're in focus here, a little bit of out of focus here and in focus there. But you get a greater depth. So if you're shooting, say, a field at sunrise of flowers, you need to open up the aperture so you can get more light in. This is a great way to do that. So it's a lot, and then this is kind of unusual. I've actually never used this lens. This is our soft focus. Wedding photographers like this because you can get a nice sharp picture if you want, or you can turn it to a soft focus. So you got a out of focus area and a sharp core. So you can still make out what it is, but still you're gonna blow out the specular highlights, but the darker areas you can get a sharper core. So we do have that as well. So lots to choose from. We have, I think the last count is 66 lenses that are for sale now. So get each one. So those are kind of mechanics of stuff, your left brain that we've covered so far. And so I'm going to try to move completely over to the right brain here in just a minute, and we'll talk a little more about the aesthetics. So to do that, we need to look at how the brain sees things, how the brain works, and what catches your eye, what makes you look at something. Because you want people, when they look at your photos, you want them to look at your subject, not something else. You want to tell a story effectively. So what catches the eye? Well, there's a lot of things that catch the eye. The brightest object in the composition, the sharpest thing in the composition, geometric shapes, which includes primary shapes, are more important, like squares, circles, and equilateral triangles are more important than your secondary shapes, but your secondary shapes will get your attention too. Rectangles, ovals, non-equilateral triangles as well, and then other sorts of shapes as well. And I'll talk about all these in particular. People, we're wired to look at people. I mean, you walk down in a mall, you walk down the street, what are you looking at? You're looking at the cars, maybe a little bit. You're probably not looking at stars, but you're watching the people all the time. You always are looking at people. So we're wired to see that. And then motion. This is kind of a defense mechanism. So we're always looking for motion. Why does the possum play dead? Because animals and people and that, they look for motion, and motion means food. So we look for motion. That's how our brains are wired. So we're looking for motion. So let's start with some of these. The brightest thing in the object, the brightest object in there. So I got 3 objects up here. And what are you looking at first? The yellow one. Yeah, it's the brightest one. So we tend to look at the brightest thing that's in the picture. So I'm looking for that. If I'm shooting a subject that's dark and there's a bright object in the background, I know it's going to distract from my subject. So if the subject itself is bright, it's great. If the subject is not the brightest object there, you got to be very careful. If it's all backlit and it's bright, that's okay. But if it's a single specular highlight or something like that, it will catch your attention and draw the eye away from your subject. So you have a much more powerful shot if you watch for that. Are you looking at the birds in the water there? Or are you looking at the sun? Immediately you start looking at the sun. What are you looking at here? The nose. Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We'll talk about triangles. She's pointing at the nose. She's got their eyes right above the nose, but the nose is, and the mask itself is white. And so it draws your eye, so that's not as distracting. Obviously a lighthouse, this is my main subject. Are you looking at the right side or the left side of the lighthouse? You're looking at the left because it's the brightest. See how your eyes work, how your brain's wired? So you're looking at the left side. No, it's just obvious. I actually took and photoshopped this with the vignetting and that. So it would draw your eye down here, and you've got something we'll talk about later, negative space, and draws you right down to that. Of course, we also have a person there, so we're wired to see a person, we're wired to see the brightest thing. So I took advantage of that and actually darkened the left side, the upper corner, and made sure that that was brighter. So that was deliberate, and I did that in Photoshop as well. Your sharpest object is extremely important. The sharpest object is what you want people to look at. And this one here, I was doing this company called Day by Day Gourmet. We were shooting the food photography here, and I want to make sure this is sharp because I want the feeling and the impression of the entire setup there, but I don't want your eye wandering all over with all these different objects to focus on. I want to draw you away. So I make sure that the subject itself is very, very sharp. So I'm always looking for that, making sure that I tell the story. Here I have the bride and her father, but we're not looking at that, we're looking at the groom. Your eyes immediately go there, and it's kind of hard to look at the others, isn't it? You're looking at him, and you kind of look at the others, but you keep going back to him. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but most important is he is the sharpest thing in the subject. 3 crystal objects, which one are you looking at? The front one, the back one, or the middle one? The middle one, yeah. So the sharpest objects is always the one you're going to. And here, I got some very powerful colors, some bright stuff in the background there, but I want to make sure you're looking at wheat. We'll talk about this picture a little bit later, a little more detail. Actually, it looks a little better here. Here I have objects that in the front that are out of focus, in the back that are out of focus, and you're looking at, hopefully you're looking at this flower here. The screens actually look a little bit better over here. So we're looking at that. Then you have your geometric shapes. I love working with the geometric shapes. When I go out shooting and I want a powerful picture, I look for the light, make sure the light's right in the first place, and then I look for geometric shapes. What kind of geometric shapes are we going to be looking for? Well, the most powerful are your squares, your triangles, and your circles. So I look for those first and see where they are. If the squares, triangles, and circles are distracting, they may not be my main subject. I might want to take those out of the picture, recompose in some way. Then you have your rectangles, your non-equilateral triangles, and your ovals. And after that, you've got your parallelograms and just odd shapes, whatever they may be. So when you're looking at this beautiful picture of the tulips, right? Is everybody looking at the tulips? Nobody's looking at the tulips? What are you looking at? The balloon. Why are we looking at the balloon? Well, there's a circle there. The circle draws your eye there. In fact, if you look very carefully, there's a second circle back there as well. So we're looking for circles there. So our eyes are drawn to circles more so. Even though there's brilliant colors in the entire scene, we're looking at that. Again, are we looking at the engine? Are we looking at the grill? No, we're looking at the headlight, circles. In fact, there's 2 circles. When I shot this, there were a lot of things to shoot. What caught my attention? The telephone. Why did the telephone catch my attention? Because it has some basic shapes. Circle, wow, this is incredible. It's got another circle and another circle. But it also has some other elements in here that caught my attention as well. For instance, we have the rectangles as well. So it's got some very powerful elements. In fact, if you look at the bell, it's a semicircle. So we've got lots of elements that cause us to look at the subject. So I've had several buildings to shoot at, but I picked this building to shoot. Why? Because it had the main elements I wanted. It has a triangle, it has a square, it has a rectangle, it has an a parallelogram, has lots of circles. Everybody comments on the circles there. And of course it has lots of other little elements too, all around, that catch your attention. So to me this is a powerful picture because it has all those main elements that capture my eye. Again, ovals, rectangles, parallelograms, rectangles, squares. I mean, there's lots here to capture. So I'm moving around and moving these elements around by where I stand, by where I put the camera, up, high, down, low, and so forth. Even this, looks like a simple picture. This to me was very, very powerful. Why? Two elements here. Throwing the background out of focus, so I'm causing your eye to go to the left, and it's the brightest object there, and it's a triangle. So I'm looking for these geometric shapes. This one here, and I'm always looking for this. No, the sky didn't look like that. I told you I was a Photoshop teacher. Okay, so, but I'm looking at the triangles, and of course there's lots of elements. When you shoot in the barns, you've got the squares, the rectangles, and so forth. So there's a lot of those same elements in there that will create this powerful. That is much more powerful than if I was to walk behind the barn and shoot the trees in the background. It just wouldn't be that exciting, even if I did Photoshop the sky. So you're going to be looking for things like circles, looking for squares, rectangles. I look for these elements first, and then I find my subject. So even the dome at the top is half of a circle. And I look for elements within elements. So obviously I have a triangle up there, but more importantly I've got the rectangles, the squares, a whole bunch of things going on here. So lots of things that make this picture interesting. And even with people, I'm looking for that. Our eyes are naturally drawn to people, but even with people, I'm looking for these same sort of elements. Your eye's drawn to the subject's eyes very quickly because this is slightly out of focus, it's darker, it's brighter here. More importantly, I found a triangle. And when you're shooting more than one person, does anybody know what the rule of odds is? Shoot odd numbers of people rather than even, because we go to that. So when you're shooting people, you don't want to line them up. I just hate it. Okay, everybody light up, shortest to tallest. We're going to get your picture. You want to shoot triangles. And so if I had 4 people, how would I shoot a triangle with 4 people? Well, I put a fourth person maybe over here. So I'd have a triangle here, triangle here. So you make several triangles. So you're always looking for triangles. It's more powerful. So again, you're looking at that, and here I have a very strong element, the sunset in the background, but our eyes tend to go to the bride and the groom on the right side because we are drawn to people. Just every time you shoot people, you just automatically want to look at. Now motion, I talked about this, it has little to do with photography, but just be aware that that motion is important to us. It does catch our attention, so we tend to shoot motion as well. And there's different ways of shooting motion. Motion can be shot, and here I'm using I'm keeping my subject off to the left, but she hasn't even touched the ground yet. Freezing the motion by using a fast shutter speed to freeze the action. Typically, I think some of this is at 1/200th of a second, but typically 1/500th of a second, 1/1000th of a second, really freeze the action. And it captures something you wouldn't see. See this girl dancing out here, and the tassels are out. Actually, I just liked it because I shot her wedding too. But her tassels are flying out, and I captured those, and that's at like 1/200th of a second. So that wasn't real fast, but the tassels look great. And this is something you don't see with the eye. How often do you see a person suspended in the air like that? Not often. Well, I didn't see it either, but the photograph caught it because I shot at a fast shutter speed. At a slow shutter speed, then you can actually capture the motion. You can actually see what's going on. So sometimes you want to, you get some motion blur, and you say, ah, crud, I blew the picture. And I almost did that on this one here. I almost threw this out. This has become one of my favorite shots because look at how long her fingers are as she's moving. So very, very slow shutter speed, very soft. Everything's out of focus. And I still try to this day to get good out of focus pictures. This is one of the few ones I got that I really like, out of focus pictures. So those are the things that catch the eye. Now we know it catches the eye. How do we arrange those elements in order to make an interesting picture? So this is the part that if you even brought nothing but your iPhone, this is going to be helpful to you. So first and most important rule is the rule of thirds. Probably the most element rule. You learn it in painting and drawing and everything else, the rule of thirds. Basically what it is you can divide your scene into 3 columns and 3 rows. And it doesn't matter if you're shooting horizontal or you're shooting vertical, the rules remains the same either way. What you're going to do is take your subject, the most important part, like on people, it's their eyes, but whatever your subject is, and you want to put them where those lines cross or to the outside. But typically about where those lines cross. What you don't want to do, what the amateurs do all the time, no matter how expensive your equipment is put it in the center. So if you have live view and it has the rule of thirds, you can put those lines up there, turn that on, cut a postum note the size of one of those thirds and put it over there. And then take the rest of your pictures using live view. Okay, you'll learn the rule of thirds real quick. So shooting the sunset, you saw the opening picture, that was a sunset. This is the same sunset. This gal came down on her walker, you can see the little walker there. She came down on her walker, sat down, started playing the flute. It's a sunset. What a great romantic time. And I took her picture there. I wanted to make sure I got the flute in there. Didn't need to get everything, but most importantly, I want to make sure her eyes were in that upper third. So I captured them there. When you're shooting a landscape, everybody puts the horizon dead center, and you don't. That's just, that's deadly. You don't want to do that. So you want to make sure your horizon is either on the bottom third or the upper third. What's more important? Now there's a lot of fluffy clouds that'd be more interesting, but I want to have lower third. I also have something here we'll talk about later, leading lines. But notice the road ends right in that spot there. So I deliberately did that. And there's that original picture we started. That's the same sunset where we have the flute player. And I put the water right on the lower third and the sun not in the center but off to the third. So I'm making sure it's off there. Even your kid, makes their first sandcastle net. Everybody takes a quick picture and they put it dead center. Go ahead and use the rule of thirds. Take that. Walking around Spokane, everybody takes this. It's really a powerful image when you go up there, but everybody puts that dead center with lots of sky above, lots of sky on either side. Make sure you use the rule of thirds there to make sure it's off to the right, off to the left. In this case, because it's leaning to the right, I put it to the right. So you want things to kind of move to the center, even when people are looking. Same park, this is squirrel, and I used the bokeh, the soft background, long telephoto. This is a 400mm DO lens. And I made sure my subject here has his eyes up in the upper third here. Notice where I put them. So this is a deliberate shot that way. This is a friend of mine. She plays a mean jazz violin. And I took this shot here. So again, upper third, I made sure her eyes were in the upper third. Notice I cut off her head. People say, don't cut off the head. I cut off her head. I cut off her ear. Cut off all that. But more importantly, some people think, well, you got to fill the frame. Isn't that the rule? Fill the frame? Not necessarily. If you don't fill the frame, you don't have anything over there. First of all, I wanted to catch the bow and the violin. I want to get a little bit of that. Now, you'll see that little layer with the rule of thirds. You've got this and this going on. But also you create something that's called negative space. And what negative space does is it draws your eye over to your subject and it sticks. If you put your subject in the center, it could be the brightest and the sharpest object. Your eye will immediately go to that object, but then your brain says, what else is going on? And starts looking around for other things on the outside. When it's off to the side and you have negative space, it draws it over there and it stays. So if you're telling your story and it says, I want you to look at her, negative space causes you to go out there and you stay there. So that's very effective. So if this is your kid on the beach, that's a great one. Make a picture, put it in a photo book, but don't show it to your friends because it's not very interesting. You always want to think about working with something and making your snapshot into a photograph. So here I'm, again, using the rule of thirds. She's off in thirds. And notice there's absolutely nothing important in the center. What's that purple bucket doing over there? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. This is a shot, this is a senior portrait that I shot, and this is the way she wanted it. We wanted her hair out. We actually have it lit completely wrong, from the bottom up. I mean, it's just, everything about this is wrong. I really like her eyes. But this is what she wants. She wanted it out there. Now you're looking at her eyes. Now you're looking at her hair. Now you're looking at the logo on her shirt, and you're looking at the number. And she's just a Seahawk fan and stuff. And I like it. But, you know, so that's the picture she wanted. But later on, I went and did something called cropping because I didn't get it the way I want. So I had lots of megapixels to play with, so I did a little cropping. To me, her eyes just jump out at me. Put it in the upper third. So if you don't get it right the first time, you know, do some cropping, move it around. Sometimes you just want to shoot wide and do the cropping later. Now, another thing you want to do is balance elements. I use this all the time, balancing elements, taking two strong elements and balancing one against the other. So here I have a barn on one side, I've got a wagon on the other. So I'm looking for those two elements. I shot the wagon by itself, I shot it with the barn. It's much nicer when I'm balancing it. Here again, I'm balancing this over here. I said I mentioned this here. This is actually taken in the streets of New York. So you got your manhole cover here. Again, you got part of a circle, so that's catching your eye. Somebody's was supposed to be their lunch, sitting in there. And this captures, this is, I mentioned this to my father. My father was raised in New York. At the age of 6, he's a poor family. He had to go out and sell pretzels in the streets of Manhattan to get money for his own shoes. He was also a chain smoker. So there's a cigarette butt there. So when I was walking down the streets downtown and I saw this and I saw a cigarette butt in that, I says, I have to shoot this. So this has a meaning to me. So interesting story, huh? So every picture has a story. It may not mean anything to you, it means something to me. Again, balancing the elements. And look at the barn has your rectangles, parallelograms, triangles, also it's a very strong element. And of course, a living creature or people is a very strong element, so I balanced the two out. There's a big story on that one too. I just shot this a couple days down where I live. Scal wants some pictures for Facebook, so we were shooting some pictures. And they just put these murals up all over town. There's murals everywhere. So I had a ball shooting her against the murals, balancing the two elements out. That's not to be confused with symmetry. Okay, I'm using two elements, but symmetry is a little bit different. Symmetry is we have things that are equal on both sides. So we got a door on the left, door on the right. Of course, they're different colors in that, but we saw this shot before. This is with the 10 to 22, equal amount on each side. Of course, cars are shooting straight on. Typically, these are boring little HDR. We'll fix that. Shooting something like that, so it's equal left and right, symmetry, and that's where you break the rule of thirds. That's where you really do put something in the center, so it's equal on both sides. So we're breaking the rule of thirds here. Then when I'm really in a fix, my fallback is diagonals, shooting diagonals. I see these 3 pots here, and I saw other people shooting this. They stand right in front of me, you got 3 pots. Just like the people, we have 3 in a row, you don't have the triangle, you want to do something. So I shoot the diagonals. So I'm going from left to right or right to left, bottom to top or whatever. There's other people shooting this at the same time I was. And they're shooting straight down, they're shooting straight at it. But I shot at an angle because to me, it's much more interesting. Even this, I decided this is actually taken with a little point and shoot, shot at an angle. I wish the piano wasn't there. The day before it wasn't, I came back to shoot it. But the piano is dead center. It's dark, so it's not as impressive. And what you don't see in this picture is a security guard standing there, so I wasn't about to move the piano. But I did shoot this at an angle. I want to make sure this was right in the corner, and that last stair ended right in the corner, so it draws the eye down. And shooting the beach of California, instead of shooting straight at I want to catch the power of the waves. Shooting sideways is a little bit better, but you can't shoot straight down. Shooting a diagonal on that makes it a lot more powerful picture. So using diagonals when nothing else works. Even something like this. Here I put my subject dead center. I'm breaking the rule of thirds here, but I'm using 2 things here. I'm using diagonals. What would be the other rule? Triangle. Yeah, I got a nice triangle in there as well. So this is the same gal here. She wanted to have the brick background. I says, that's nice, but let's make it a little more interesting. And we shoot, making sure we have a nice even diagonal all the way through there. So using diagonals is great. Disequilibrium is kind of like diagonals, only this is the kind of picture you take when you have your camera in your hand and you accidentally took a picture, okay? So you're gonna shoot at really odd, so I kind of have an angle, but it's just basically, my best shots really are when I shoot without looking through the viewfinder. This one here, a lot of people are shooting this and they shoot straight at it, making sure the water was going straight down. And I shot some that way too. It was a boring picture. But look at the water going at an angle like that. So I'm shooting at kind of a weird angle at that. So it's not straight, it's not a diagonal, it's disequilibrium. And I was actually teaching this when I shot this is at a Japanese garden. And I was teaching this was with a 20D. So I don't have any live view to shoot. And I literally just got down like this, put it on the ground, and says, here's how you do it. I click like that, that's right out of the camera. And then I got up and immediately took it again like that. What was everybody else doing? Well, this part here is right at face level. And everybody's taking pictures like this. Boring pictures. These are much more interesting, I think. And again, the same thing here. And I actually took it, the sun is in the background, blowing that out. And I actually took it with the sun hidden and with the sun there, and I decided I like the sun. You don't normally do that, I broke the rules. We'll talk about breaking rules later. And of course, we talked about the different lenses and how they affect depth of field. So long telephoto. Depth of field makes a big difference because it's out of focus. It causes your eye to go there. So when picking pictures and doing depth of field, you can use that to cause the eye to go to where you want. You got to be careful with the depth of field. Make sure you do it enough to what you feel is right. Well, how much is enough? How much is too much? You have to tell me because you're the artist. If somebody says it's too much and you don't agree, you're right. They're wrong. Okay, whatever you like is right. So that first one had a shallow depth of field. This one here, this is sunrise at Yellowstone National Park, and this wagon was here, and I want to catch the colors of the sunrise and on the mountains in the background here. But here I want a very big depth of field. So what kind of lens did I use? I had to use a wide angle. Yeah, use a wide angle, get everything in there, lots of depth of field in that. So picking, doing rule of thirds, getting the right information you want there, and then picking the right lens is extremely important. And this is just the opposite. Nice fall day, beautiful gold color and the leaves in the background, but I want to make sure you capture that. Negative space, drawing your eye up like that. So that's a long telephoto. Again, long telephoto here. So you're capturing that, you still got the hint of the other leaves there, but your eye goes to the sharpest one there. And we talked about this little guy before. Again, we're using shallow depth of field, so your eyes you have negative space and you still have the whole squirrel there, but you're being drawn over to the squirrel. So I'm always looking for that, deciding this one here, I don't want to throw everything out of focus, so I probably have about 5, 6 on this one here. And this one here, I actually have 2 subjects going on. I have a flower in the foreground, and that's the sharpest thing, draws you. But the background is actually a little distracting, isn't it? You have something in the background, it's soft, it's 2 people, and the gentleman's going up there. And how romantic is this? He goes out to tulip fields and he hands her the ring. Will you marry me? Isn't that wonderful? And so you got the flowers in the foreground, the proposal in the back. Actually, that's my sales rep giving instructions. But the other story was much better, wasn't it? And here's something where I was trying to deal with it. I wanted this church in the background, and I wanted the machinery in the foreground. But the problem is the church is white. So how did I tone it down? Put it more in the center, and I threw it out of focus. So I used 2 of those rules to calm down the church in the background, and I still wanted it in there, and then make sure this was very, very sharp. And you can see a little bit of the barbed wire that I had to shoot through as well. And so I used these rules to try to capture that. And I took a lot of pictures before I came up with something that told the story the way I wanted it. This one here, making your subject jump out, making sure we got a nice beach. It's Edmonds Beach, just north of Seattle. Shooting here, I wanted to get some good shots there. This one here, it's a senior portrait about 3 minutes before sunset, so we're getting nice golden lights in there, and I'm throwing the background out of focus. I did a couple other things here, but I threw the background and the foreground out of focus with it, so your eye goes directly to it. Notice, do I have her in her center? No, I don't. Actually, her eyes, your eyes are the most important part. So it doesn't matter if they're in center or not. As long as the eyes are in the upper third, you're doing good. So you need to be careful too when you're throwing out of focus. How much detail do you want in the background? Here I want very little. I just wanted the feeling of this when I was shooting this, so I threw this quite a bit out of focus with that. But this one here, I actually went to a smaller f-stop, so I get her in focus, but I did want to get those patterns. I didn't want to blow it out completely, and that was a little further away, so I would have really blown it out a lot. So you have to kind of decide how much do you want. But then we're using the rule of thirds. We got her in the upper third, we got her on this side. And the rule of thirds, when you're shooting people, if they're facing in, they should always face in, never out. Never have them face out. That's the rule. Okay, we break rules all the time. I got a beautiful picture of a sunset on a beach with a mother, a woman surfer and her daughter, but I have them facing out. If they're facing out, it means it's the end of the day, they're going home. If they're facing in, it means it's the beginning of the day and they're going surfing. See the difference in the story? So I should probably stick that in here. What did I do? Did I lose my, I did. There's always another option. So again, throwing the background out of focus, the light in the background, nice soft moonlight in the background. I'll talk about this a little bit later. grab this Japanese crane fly. I just had to shoot a Japanese crane fly because this is in the Japanese gardens. Got to have Japanese crane fly. So we shoot with cameras with a sensor that's 2-dimensional, and we're shooting at that. So when you shoot 3 dimensions, you need to, there's a couple of things you do to make it look 3-dimensional, even though it's only 2-dimensional. But we really can't print 3D. We can't do a lot of that stuff. So 3 dimensions, when I'm shooting 3 dimensions, I want to have that there. I'm always looking to put something into the foreground. We've mentioned about that when we use a wide angle, but also with telephotos, if you put something in the foreground, it gives it the 3-dimensional look. With 3 dimensions, then what you have here is the foreground. I put those flowers in the foreground. Everybody was standing out here and taking a picture of the lake. And it doesn't give you a whole lot. So when you're shooting 3 dimensions, look for something to put in the foreground. This is a great time to use that wide angle lens. So I have something in the foreground, in the middle, and in the background. Same thing with this. When I shot this bird, I was up on a hill coming down, being very quiet, very cautious, because I really want to get a 3-dimensional look to this by getting the reeds in the foreground on this. So I got my foreground, my middle, and background. 4 hours later, when I came back, that bird was still there. He wasn't going anywhere. I could throw my camera at him. So another thing that kind of leads your eyes either to where you want them to go or leads them away, something called leading lines. And so many times I'll look for leading lines, something that directs you. This one really breaks the rule of thirds because your eyes really go to the center. That's because we have leading lines forcing your eye up into that direction. So I use that often. Here's a wide angle. Isn't that powerful? So it's distorting it, and it also has some nice leading lines leading up into the other direction. So I'm looking for that. Also using diagonals. So you see I'm mixing some of these rules together to make a much more powerful shot. This is the Montana a couple of years ago, that big fire they had. This is on the Canadian side of Glacier National Park. Actually had a couple news agencies ask for this picture. This is not photoshopped. That's what it looked like. And so I got that, but I want, yeah, it's at sunset, but I mean, you couldn't even see, yeah, it's
particulates in the atmosphere.
yeah, it's particulates in the atmosphere. And then after I left there, I actually drove through the fire. But I got nice leading lines all the way through here. Again, I look for these, a strong element in front. Notice the rectangles here that we have here, strong elements in the foreground, elements using the rule of thirds, and again, leading lines to draw your eye back as well. So it makes for a powerful picture using all these. We talked about this before. These are leading lines. Which direction are we going? Are we going from left to right or right to left? Right. Why do you say that? The trucks are all going the same direction. Yeah, I took quite a while before I got all the trucks going in that direction, nobody in the other lane. So I did that. So you literally see that going in that direction. So I'm looking for that. And then framing, if you want to break the rule of thirds, framing is a great way to do that. I look for frames all the time. Molten Barns up in the Grand Tetons, the most photographed barn in the world. There's actually 2 of them up there. And this one here, I saw a lot of people a lot of professionals taking a picture. They actually were standing almost where I was, only a couple steps forward, so they get those stupid branches out of the way. I like the branches. I'm framing it on either side. I'm framing it with green on the bottom, and the mountains, of course, are framing the barn on the back. So those are the Teton as well. This one here said, "I'm already framed for you. Please take my picture." So I did. But it was just beautifully framed. This is one dead center, but I loved it. And of course, this is Nevada City. It's a ghost town in Montana. They're supposed to tear this building down, so I want to catch it before they just built it. It hadn't been used yet. The foundation was wrong, and the curvature of that during certain times of the day caused the sun to come down and burn people. CNN went out there and actually put a purse down there and watched it melt to the ground. And so I wanted to get that, but I wanted something interesting. So rather than walk way up here and get a picture of the building, I want to frame it with the other buildings using a wide angle lens. I actually did this also with a fisheye as well. And then here I'm just using a simple frame. I wish that didn't have a pole going through the middle of her head. But just frame thing. This is an HDR, so your skaters there look kind of funky because I got 3 different pictures. But framing the building with the poles, using a fisheye, bending it all around. So the frame doesn't have to be a square frame. It can be just about anything. Rick Salmon, one of our Explorers Light, we were doing a photo shoot together, and it was called. They ran off to shoot he was teaching people how to shoot strangers, And so the hired models sitting there freezing to death. So, and I just got in between. This is Gasworks Parks, and it's an old gas refinery, and they've painted this one section very bright. So I just got between a couple things and framed her between these pipes. And when I'm shooting, I'm looking for that. What's in the background? Always look in the background. So here I'm shooting her up against this. I made sure her head was in between where the window was. Anything else would have looked kind of funny. This is Buffalo Bill's, the saloon where he had his hotel and he did all his interviews for his show and that. And so I had her sit up on the bar and made sure she was framed with the mirror there.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It seems like the ones you've shown go against the rule of thirds.
They do.
And
That's what I said in the beginning. Framing is a way to get away from the rule of thirds.
Got it. Okay.
Framing is a way to get away from the rule of thirds. This one here, I'm framing it with that nice moonlight. By the way, that's not moonlight. That's a light on the side of the building there, and I just threw it out of focus so it looked like it. And this is where Rick Salmon thought I was being silly because it's just a little bit higher than my eye level. I'm staying on my toes as high as I can, and I'm trying to shoot this thing, and Rick comes, "What are you doing?" And I thought he was going to scare away the Japanese crane fly. But they either move or they stay there. They don't really seem. So here I'm breaking the rule of thirds, so waterfall's dead center. And again, picking the right lens. This is a 70 to 200 millimeter. This is an HDR shot that I did. But notice how I framed it with the bridge on the top. I made sure I had the walls on the side and the bottom as well. I did the same thing. I took another shot of this and just another way of framing. I did this in the next one with a fisheye lens. Same waterfall down at the bottom here. And you can see the framing, but notice how I framed the top, very top, with all the leaves, the sides with the trees and so forth, standing in the exact same position. So the lens makes a big difference on how dramatic your picture can be. So now you know you need all the lenses, right? And again, just something simple like that. Grab something, frame your subject with it. Oops, didn't want to do that. Anyway, that last one, you already saw that. I framed her with the wheat coming up and threw it out of focus. And of course, then there's always that rule to fill the frame. And when I fill the frame, here I'm using actually the rule of thirds. Notice I move this over. I don't want to see all the bread. There's just enough of the bread in the frame, filling the frame to make you hungry, right? It's after lunch. You're all getting hungry. So I love doing stuff like this where I have patterns and so forth. So filling the frame, really easy to do with a macro. Basically, you're going to be filling the frame most of the time when you're shooting macro shots. So I really like to fill a frame. This is actually, I do not recommend this. This is a bear shot with a wide angle lens. You don't want to do that. What you do not see in this picture is the high voltage wire between him and I. And he knows about the high voltage wire. He learned about that early on. So I got a nice wide angle on that. But filling the frame is always nice. And I was shooting a Wild West Photo Fest. We had a bunch of models, and everybody go up to the top floor of this beautiful place, and they all saw this outfit. It's just gorgeous outfit. Everybody took a picture of the whole outfit. What was important here, really, was the details in the zipper, the buttons, and the fringe here. And of course, I picked only to shoot 3 because I'm using the rule of odds. I shot 3 of the buttons, 1 zipper, and caught that. And so this is what makes it a powerful shot. So, and then patterns and textures. I love shooting patterns and textures. Do it all the time. Sometimes I just want something that just fills color. Put this in my, in your bathroom or someplace where you just want some color thrown in there. So your eye isn't going to anything particular. You don't know what my subject is here. Well, you know what my subject is. You just don't know which one. And so patterns are just repetitive things over and over again. I love to shoot patterns. Just basically to shoot colors because I do that. But I don't know which is my subject here. And that's deliberate. So that's what a pattern does. It makes for some interesting, just decoration many times, just art. But it can be boring. If you want to make a pattern interesting, for instance, this is a repetitive pattern over and over and over again. And I might use this for a background, I might use it for a backdrop, and never know when I'm going to use this. But if I want to make this interesting, what I would do is break up the pattern with just one thing. That's why you saw that pigeon in the pattern in the beginning. Whoops. And I've got to go back. So we break it up here. Just the water faucet there. Breaks it up, makes it a little more interesting. Doesn't your eye go right to that? So it breaks up the pattern. So we're looking at that all the time. The pattern here is what? A bunch of crabs at the Pike Place Market in Seattle. And I took just the crabs for a while, and then I saw this here, and so I put that in there, broke up the pattern with it. So breaking up the patterns will make it interesting. And of course, we talked about angles and stuff like that, but there's times you really do want to get it straight. You don't want to have a picture like this, and we do this, we see something, oh man, what a cool car, pick it up and you take a picture, and it's not straight. So, you know, take your time, take a breath, make sure you have the picture straight. Huh?
I thought it was Frisco.
You thought it was Frisco, yeah. Yeah, I can't get it straight there. I have one leg shorter than the other, so every picture I take is 3.8 degrees off to the left. And I know because I've done it in Photoshop so many times, I know it's 3.8 degrees every single time. So, watch your background. I don't know if you've really caught on to this, but we've talked about the subjects and making sure you make your picture clear. But if your subject's not clear, your story's not clear, so chances are it's because you have distracting objects in the background. So be watching your background all the time. I took this picture, and unfortunately this gal, I told her I was going to do this, and she says, this is my favorite shot. Oh my goodness, you're kidding. I told you this is a bad shot. See, I picked up something growing out of her head, and you want to be careful of that. Well, thank goodness I know Photoshop. So we took care of that, and I gave her the picture. And again, here, we're looking at that, and I'm watching for the corn in the background. I don't mind the corn in the background, but I want to be careful what's going back there. Tree growing out of her head. Isn't that fun? So be watching through your viewfinder. Even this is actually a professional shot, and I was helping the professional shoot this. And they put this chair right here, red on one side, white on the other. I said, I told her, this is going to be a bad shot. Can I take it? She said, sure. Took the picture there, because what I don't like about that is this right through the center of her head. I don't want that. You don't want to cut off at the neck. You know, she's got a line through her head, but never do it at the neck. And so I just took a second picture of that. So I'm just going to move over to the left about 3 feet, and I took the picture again. Much more interesting, much more dramatic, I think. So we've learned a lot of rules here. There's a whole lot of rules. We also need to learn to break the rules. Once you learn the rules, you can break the rules. Don't break the rules before you learn them, but know why you did it. Like me having the surfer walk out of the scene. So you need to break it. And then shoot things from a different point of view. Don't take one shot. Keep shooting. Shoot over and over again. May you remember this shot here, this one here. Can anybody tell me what the subject is in this? The grass. Actually, it's wheat, but that's a good guess, but that's wrong. The red barn, because no, that's wrong too. See, I'm not telling the story the way I want to. Take a look at the red barn carefully. See the shadow on there? Yeah. What does it tell you? What time of day is it? It's about 2 minutes before sunset. What I was trying to get, I saw the golden wheat, I saw the golden light. The subject is the light, the golden light. I didn't get the picture. And I broke the rule of thirds. Horizon's dead center, that's terrible. I should have gone a little bit higher. And I can crop that later, I could fix that. But what I did is I took 3 steps forward, dropped down to my knees, and took the shot again.
Yes.
That's the picture I wanted. Okay, I still got the red barn, but it's not, red's very, very powerful, so I softened it up by taking it. So you see how you think about this thing? So yeah, I got a lot of them there. Oops. So we have lots of things. We got the left brain, the right brain. Essentially what we're looking at here when we're doing that is when your camera is in your hand and you're playing with the dials and the buttons and that, you're using your left brain. Okay? So you still got to learn that. You still got to read your manual. You still got to, take those classes on lighting and all that sort of stuff. So you need to know your camera. You need to learn about light. You need to know about exposure, ambient light, when to use flash, and so forth. You need to choose your camera settings. While you're choosing them, you're using your left brain. You need to pick your location and background. Sometimes I'll do that a day in advance. We'll think about that. So that's all left brain stuff. Choose your lenses. And so we've seen the lens can make a huge difference in the way that picture looks. What eventually you want to do then is get to the right brain. When are you using your right brain? You use your right brain the moment you do this. As soon as you start looking through the viewfinder and you take the lens cap off, you'll be able to, you start using your right brain, because now you're starting to look at the elements. Do you have squares, circles, rectangles, triangles, and so forth? You can compose, and so we got all these different rules we learned about. Rule of thirds, balance, symmetry, diagonals, depth of field, 3D, leading lines, framing, and then filling the frame. So lots of rules we've learned today that you can use, and combine those rules together. The more you combine the rules, the more powerful it becomes. And of course, don't forget to check your background. And so those are all the rules that you can use with your right brain. Hopefully you wrote down all those different rules, and go and try those things out. And once you get them down really, really well, just remember this one important rule. There are no rules. If you like it, it's good, okay? So with that, I hope you learned some stuff here that will help you no matter what kind of camera you have, no matter what you're doing. You should be able to go from snapshots, so things don't look like what everybody else does and puts on Facebook. It'll actually look like photography, and people start being wowed by your pictures. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, we've got a few minutes here. We do have to get out quickly because we've got a big group coming in a few minutes, so we've got about 5 minutes. I'll be happy to talk to you with that. But with that, have a good day.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.